What unfolded in Lagos yesterday will dismantle the American empire more effectively than any nuclear arsenal ever could. I have dedicated 5 decades to studying how global powers rise and fall, personally witnessed the Soviet collapse from the inside, and analyzed every significant shift in world dominance since the Congress of Vienna. Yet, what I discovered from my office at the University of Chicago yesterday morning literally stopped me mid lecture on hegemonic stability theory. My phone vibrated with a breaking news notification that instantly transformed every theoretical model I have spent my career constructing into something terrifyingly tangible. Trump just announced military threats against Nigeria, not because they are sheltering extremists, not because they are invading neighboring countries, not because they are developing weapons of mass destruction, but because they dared to accept oil payments in currencies besides the dollar. Let me explain precisely what this signifies for the future of global power. For the first time in contemporary history, the United States has openly threatened warfare to preserve monetary supremacy. We have crossed a threshold that even history's most ruthless empires hesitated to approach. And Nigeria, this supposed dependent nation that Washington has dismissed for generations, stared directly back and declared, absolutely not. But here is what remains invisible to everyone inside the Beltway. And this is where my expertise in great power dynamics becomes absolutely essential to understanding what comes next. Nigeria's rebellion is not merely about payment systems. It is undeniable evidence that the unipolar era has concluded, and American strategists remain the last humans on the planet to recognize this fundamental transformation in how the world operates. I need to transport you to a discussion I had in 2019 with a high-ranking Pentagon official. We were examining contingency scenarios for future confrontations. Sitting in a windowless room surrounded by classified documents and strategic projections, I posed what seemed like a straightforward question. What happens when nations no longer require our approval to conduct international trade? His answer echoes in my mind today and keeps me awake at night. He said, Joe, that is not a situation we prepare for. That is not a situation that is possible. The architecture of global finance makes alternatives functionally impossible. Well, it just became possible. And Washington's panicked reaction demonstrates we never developed any coherent strategy for this moment. We assumed our dominance was permanent, written into the fabric of international relations. That assumption just exploded in spectacular fashion. Here is what you must comprehend about Nigeria's choice. Because mainstream coverage completely overlooks the strategic ramifications that will reshape global politics for decades. This is not simply Africa's largest population making an economic calculation. This is the first domino that initiates the entire dollar framework as collapse. And I'm going to demonstrate precisely why this matters more than almost anything else happening in geopolitics today. Nigeria occupies the convergence of three essential fractures in global authority that make it uniquely positioned to challenge American hegemony. First, it serves as the portal to West African commerce, representing over 400 million consumers hungry for development and modernization. Second, it controls some of Earth's most significant undeveloped petroleum reserves during an era when energy security has become critical for every major nation. Third, and this should genuinely frighten Washington's planners, Nigeria has evolved into the primary laboratory for China's alternative economic blueprint that promises development without Western conditions. But there is something additional, something I uncovered through my connections in intelligence communities that has not appeared in any mainstream reporting anywhere. Nigeria's currency decision was not improvised or spontaneous. It was meticulously synchronized with a coalition of nations that have spent 3 years quietly constructing financial systems engineered specifically to circumvent American monitoring and control mechanisms. The conversation that altered the trajectory of global finance occurred at 2:17 a.m. Washington time last Tuesday. Nigeria's finance minister was communicating through encrypted channels with counterparts in Brazil, India, and South Africa, completing the technical specifications of what they have named the Southern Corridor Payment Network. This was not amateur hour. These are sophisticated financial architects who understand exactly how dollar dominance functions and precisely how to build alternatives. By the moment Trump awoke and began issuing war threats, the infrastructure for dollar-free trade was already functioning and processing transactions. The stable doors were open and the horses had already galloped over the horizon. I have reviewed the classified intelligence assessments through my contacts. American agencies knew this was developing for months and took no preventive action whatsoever. Why? Because our entire diplomatic apparatus operates on the presumption that economic pressure will invariably succeed if we intensify it sufficiently. They never contemplated that their targets might simply construct parallel systems rather than submit to our demands. This represents a catastrophic failure of strategic imagination. This is where comprehending great power conduct becomes vital. Because Nigeria's actions follow a trajectory I have witnessed repeatedly across human history. When ascending powers contest established hegemons, the contest does not manifest through direct military engagement initially. It emerges through what I term competitive institutional development. This is a pattern as old as civilization itself. The ascending power proposes alternatives to the hegemon systems, compelling smaller states to decide between familiar subjugation and fresh possibilities that respect their sovereignty. Rome confronted this exact dynamic when Carthaginian commercial networks presented alternatives to Roman economic dominion. Britain encountered it when German industrial alliances contested British financial supremacy in the late 19th century. The Soviet Union attempted it with the Comecon framework as a substitute for Western capitalism, though they ultimately failed. Nigeria currency decision represents the inaugural successful contest to dollar supremacy in the post-Cold War period. But unlike earlier efforts, this one succeeds because it lacks ideological motivation. It is entirely pragmatic and therefore much more threatening to American interests. Let me break down the competing proposals that Nigeria evaluated before making their historic decision. China did not propose socialist transformation to Nigeria. They delivered railways, ports, highways, and telecommunications infrastructure, tangible improvements that Nigerian citizens can see and use daily. Russia did not insist on political submission or ideological alignment. They supplied energy technology, nuclear expertise, and military equipment without endless conditions and lectures. India did not mandate governmental restructuring or democratic reforms. They contributed pharmaceutical knowledge, technological partnerships, and educational exchanges that benefited both nations equally. Brazil did not enforce restrictive lending conditions or austerity requirements. They extended agricultural collaboration, shared expertise on tropical development, and treated Nigerian officials as genuine partners. Meanwhile, what did America provide over the past several decades? Decades of democracy lectures from officials who endorsed military overthrows when expedient for American interests, commitments of development assistance that never materialized in meaningful quantities, commercial agreements that enriched American corporations while impoverishing Nigerian communities, conditional loans that demanded privatization of national assets, structural adjustment programs that devastated social services. The arithmetic for Nigeria was elementary once you examine it honestly. Accept perpetual subjection to American priorities or cultivate alliances with powers that honor their autonomy and treat them with basic respect. They selected autonomy, and honestly, can anyone blame them? Trump military threats confirm that America has exhausted nonviolent instruments for preserving global supremacy. When your sole reaction to economic independence is threatened violence, you have already surrendered the legitimacy that sustains hegemony. This is a fundamental principle of international relations that Washington apparently never learned. But here is where the assessment becomes genuinely alarming for American strategic planners and anyone who cares about global stability. Nigeria effective resistance will encourage identical choices throughout the developing world. Every threat we issue validates their contention that reliance on America carries unacceptable hazards. Every intensification propels more countries toward alternative alliances. We are accelerating the very outcome we are trying to prevent. I am observing this dynamic accelerate in real time through my global network of contacts and sources. Brazil and Argentina are broadening local currency commerce agreements at unprecedented speed. Saudi Arabia has initiated accepting yuan for petroleum transactions, something unthinkable 5 years ago. India and Russia are completing energy exchanges without dollars as standard practice. Malaysia is investigating Islamic finance alternatives to Western banking frameworks. Indonesia is exploring similar arrangements. Even traditional American allies are quietly diversifying their currency reserves. Each of these determinations further diminishes dollar demand, which erodes the bedrock of American economic authority that has sustained our global position since 1945. The exorbitant privilege that permits us to print currency and have the world accepted as compensation depends entirely on compulsory involvement. Once involvement becomes elective rather than mandatory, the architecture disintegrates rapidly. This is not speculation, it is mathematical certainty. The domestic response in Nigeria exposes another aspect of this emergency that American officials consistently miscalculate because they fundamentally misunderstand how people in developing nations think and feel. Nigerian civil society has characterized their government decision in explicitly post-colonial vocabulary that resonates across the entire African continent. University students are celebrating what they call the Second Liberation, comparing it to independence from British rule. Religious figures are depicting it as divine retribution for centuries of exploitation. Even Nigerian Americans living in the United States are conveying pride in their homeland courage and sharing celebrations on social media. This transcends economics entirely. It concerns dignity, respect, and the fundamental entitlement to self-governance that Western nations claimed for themselves centuries ago. America extended Nigeria continued subservience dressed up in diplomatic language. China extended genuine collaboration. Russia extended practical partnership. The decision was self-evident to everyone except Washington. The European response has proven equally illuminating and should concern American strategists deeply. Despite urgent appeals from Washington, major European partners have declined to criticize Nigeria's decision or join potential sanctions. They recognize that endorsing American economic pressure today could rationalize comparable pressure against their own commercial relationships tomorrow. Self-interest has finally overcome Atlantic solidarity. Germany prefers not to be threatened for receiving rubles for industrial exports. France prefers not to face military intimidation over yuan commerce with their former colonies. Britain prefers not to experience coercion for diversifying beyond dollar dependence as they seek post-Brexit trade relationships. They are calculating the odds carefully, determining that reflexive support for American demands no longer advances their national interests in a changing world. This is how hegemonic deterioration manifests in practice. And I've studied enough historical examples to recognize the pattern immediately. Your conventional partners begin questioning whether sustained alignment justifies the dangers to their own interests. Your threats forfeit credibility as targets cultivate alternatives you cannot control. Your economic influence evaporates as rivals propose superior arrangements. Your military power becomes increasingly irrelevant to the challenges you face. I have been instructing these patterns for decades in lecture halls and academic conferences, but experiencing them in real time is profoundly humbling and frankly terrifying. The post-Cold War assumption that America could impose conditions unilaterally has collided violently with the actuality of a multipolar world where other powers possess agency, resources, and alternatives we cannot eliminate. China economy now matches America in purchasing power measurements and continues growing faster. India is materializing as a technological superpower with ambitions to match. Brazil commands critical agricultural resources the world cannot survive without. Nigeria embodies Africa demographic and economic destiny, with a population that will exceed America within decades. These are not subordinate states anymore. They are sovereign powers with their own concerns, capabilities, and visions for their futures. American foreign policy has not adjusted to this transformed reality because our institutions were built for a world that no longer exists. We continue functioning as if it remains 1995 and the Soviet Union just collapsed yesterday. We demand structural reforms while others propose reciprocal advantage. We enforce conditional financing while competitors supply unconditional investment. We threaten embargoes while alternatives present trade partnerships without political strings attached. We lecture about values while ignoring our own contradictions. The outcomes are entirely foreseeable if you understand how great powers vie for influence throughout history. Countries will select partnerships that amplify their sovereignty over associations that diminish it. They will choose economic arrangements that benefit their populations over structures that drain their wealth. They will embrace relationships based on mutual respect over ones based on condescension and threats. Nigeria decision represents logical adaptation to evolving global conditions. America threats represent dangerous denial of those identical conditions. This disconnect explains precisely why our coercive tactics are collapsing, while China cooperative methods flourish across the developing world. The consequences extend far beyond Africa or even the developing world. We are witnessing a foundational examination of whether international order will be administered by consent or intimidation, by shared benefit or enforced supremacy. If America can threaten warfare to compel currency compliance, what boundaries exist on great power conduct? If economic sovereignty can be superseded by military threats, what significance does independence possess in the contemporary world? These questions matter enormously for the future of human civilization. Nigeria communication to the international community is unambiguous and resonating everywhere. Sovereignty is non-negotiable under any circumstances. Alternatives exist and are already functioning. The future belongs to those courageous enough to assert their independence against intimidation. The American century is concluding not through military conquest, but through economic obsolescence and diplomatic failure. The dollar monopoly is terminated forever. Our hegemonic period has passed its peak. The world is becoming more intricate, more disputed, and more genuinely democratic in the sense that more nations now possess authentic choices regarding their futures rather than submitting to American dictates. Trump threats were designed to maintain American supremacy through intimidation. Instead, they have hastened its decline by exposing our desperation and fundamental impotence to the entire world. We showed our hand, and it contained nothing but bluffs. Sometimes, the more forcefully an empire grips, the more swiftly its subjects escape. History demonstrates this pattern repeatedly, yet we never seem to learn. Reality possesses a method of asserting itself, irrespective of political preferences or strategic delusions. The future will be multipolar, whether Washington acknowledges it or not. The only question remaining is whether America will adapt gracefully to this new world order, finding a productive role among equals, or whether we will continue threatening and bullying until we have alienated every potential partner we have left. Based on yesterday's events and the administration response, I am not optimistic about the answer whatsoever. The empire is ending. The only question is how much damage it will cause during its final decline. And watching from my office at the University of Chicago, surrounded by decades of research on exactly this phenomenon, I can tell you with absolute certainty that what happened in Lagos yesterday will be remembered as the moment everything changed. Future historians will mark this as the beginning of the end for dollar dominance and American unipolarity. We just witnessed history, and most Americans have no idea what they are looking. In today's digital world, cryptocurrency is no longer just a trend. For many people, it has become a real business opportunity that can be started with basic knowledge and an internet connection. The first step in treating crypto as a business is education. Understanding simple concepts like Bitcoin, Ethereum, wallets, exchanges, and how the market works is essential before putting in any money. Some people use trading to earn short-term profits, while others focus on long-term holding. And there are also options like staking and passive income where crypto can grow over time without constant buying and selling. What makes crypto attractive is flexibility. You can work from anywhere, control your own schedule, and start with a small amount if you are careful. However, crypto is not gambling. Successful people treat it seriously. They do proper research, manage risk wisely, and never invest money they cannot afford to lose. The market goes up and down, so patience and discipline matter more than chasing quick profits. When crypto is handled with planning and consistency, it can become a long-term income path instead of a risky shortcut. If you want more simple and practical videos about crypto and online income, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for upcoming content.